and welcome to the Gothic Unicorn. Today I'm going to be working on one of my little standalone projects, although this is a piece that could quite easily be interpreted slightly different and integrated into a bigger scene, into a miniature house, basically anywhere you want. So let's get on with it. So my main piece for working with today is this little guy here, or rather what remains of this little guy. If you've been around on my channel for a while, you may have seen me use the other parts of him. I used his skull on my mummy from last Halloween, and I believe his arm was used in my Creepmas setup. Anyway, I don't throw away the rest because there's always a use for bones. I have an idea that at some point I want to make a three-legged stool, literally a three-legged stool. I've got two legs here. I'm thinking about cutting the legs off at the knee and using the lower part of the leg and the foot for a stool or small table. But I need a third leg, and at the moment I haven't got one, so we won't worry about that. But I'm going to be using a good chunk of him today. Now, he is one of those skeletons that you get as a skeleton garland. Now, I believe that they are a Dollar Tree item in the States. These I bought from a cheap shop, not the pound shop, it was a bit more than £1, and last year the price had gone ridiculous, but I really do need to restock this time, so I will be looking to see if I can't get some off the internet for a more reasonable price. But he was in my box of scraps, and while I've been tidying I found him, and what I actually remembered was an inspiration picture that I'd saved ages ago, and this picture was of a rib cage and pelvis, obviously joined by the spine, etc., that was surrounded by roses that were growing out of it, and it just kind of looked pretty good, and it was something that I thought I might do something with, so I'm going to have a go with this. So here's the basis. Now you might be wondering what I'm going to do. Well, I'm going to be using another one of these. I used one of these jars when I did my Jubilee project, and this is what I'm planning on putting him into. It's in a little worse condition than the other one, and so I'm going to have to look at doing something a bit different on the outside, but I can make it work. And yeah, that plastic jar and this are going to be turned into a nice little decorative piece. Or at least it's a nice little decorative piece if you've got a bit of a dark sense, rather like me. Before I start taking Mr. Bones apart, this is something that I made with one of his kinsmen. This is the skeleton, the spine and rib cage of one of those skeletons, cut off and stuck into a bottle cap of air-dried clay. Now this was based upon another inspiration piece that somebody shared in a miniature group, and I had to have a go at it. And that one had a big leafed plant growing through the rib cage, one of those little air plants on the side, and then I think it might even have been the skull sitting in the pot at the bottom. Well, I made some rocks just to sit in there, just to fill out the gap, and I covered my bottle top with some string and then painted over it, and it's made a piece that will be going in my doll's house at some point. This is just to show you that you know, if you wanted an arm or two off one of these skeletons, you can still do something with the rest of it. And it's another piece I found while I've been tidying up. and as it was done just as a on the Facebook page piece, I thought I'd share it on here. The first thing is to remove the bits you don't want. The legs come off quite easily. They are just sort of poked in. The arms are actually attached, and you need to get a craft knife and persuade them. Doesn't take much. I just put a bit of a cut and then it's come off. Now obviously you can tidy this up, which I will do in a bit, tidy it up so it doesn't look quite so bulky and messy. And then I'm also going to cut off this spiky bit at the top of the spine, so that all that we have is the actual moulded part of the spine. That bit's waste now. The arm and the legs I will be keeping because they're valuable for other things, as I've said. You can always make different pieces. You could make your very own skeletal version of a certain famous lamp if you wanted to, if that suited your aesthetic. Having now got the bit that I want, I am going to take my jar, open it up obviously. Now I need to build this up, I know that, because once it's stood up, the bottom bit where the screw part is going to be lost. And what I want to do is I want to be able to raise this up so that you actually see it. Now I want it displayed as the original piece was, sort of at a bit of an angle. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to use some air dry clay to do this. So I'm going to start off by making a raised base to go in the lid. Again, I did this in my Jubilee video. I'm not sure if I'm going to do it the same way. I think I'm going to do something kind of similar but also kind of different, but yeah, I need to find some chipboard type material and get cutting. I measured the inside of my lid and worked out what size circle I needed so that it was a little bit smaller to hopefully allow enough room to fasten the lid back onto the jar. And I've cut out a load of these circles from half of a cereal box. Now this actually worked out that I got 11 on there because my circle is 2.5 inches and I happen to have a 2.5 inch circle template. This was a template that came with a particular cutter many years ago. The cutter's long gone, but I've kept the templates because particularly the circular one is useful from time to time. So these are going to get glued together. You can tell I've used all of it, even the bit over the fold in the box. Like I said, I used half a box. I literally got as many as I could. Probably could have got a 12th one, but I think that 11 is going to be enough once they're all glued together to fill that up. Now, if I look at this, I'm not going to get that. It looks like I'm going to have trouble. So 2.5 inches is a bit on the big side, so I need to trim all these down just a little bit. So it's back on the scissors. But this is what happens when you are making things like this. There's lots and lots of fiddling about to make things fit. So back to these, and I'll be back with you when they fit. I have now got this so that it will fit inside my jar. I made the mistake of measuring the lid inside and not checking how much smaller the actual opening of the jar was. So yeah, I had to do some trimming, but it's meant that what I've done is, as I have glued these together, I've given it a bit of shape. This has had a coat of glue around the edge, which just makes sure that it's all nicely cohesive, and it makes it easier when I come to paint it. It fits now, it fits in there, and the jar fastens over the top, which is what I want. This isn't quite as tall as that, but I didn't want it as tall as that. What I wanted was a good sturdy base, so that when I put the air dry clay on the top, I don't have to put so much, because that will take forever to dry, and the less I can use, the better. So I'm going to set this aside to finish drying. It started drying, but I've still got white bits, and so I need to just let it do its thing. And while that is doing its thing, I'm going to turn my attention to my little skeleton, or rather the bits of the skeleton that I'm using. I've been in and I've done a bit of trimming, took off the extra bits where the arm was attached that looked a bit clunky and weird, and I'm going to apply some paint to it. Now, you might like the sort of look that these come with, but I want it to look a bit more bleached, so I'm going to be using some linen coloured paint, and I will give this a little coat of that, and it will just lighten it up a bit, and it will suit my aesthetic a bit better. It's up to you. You know, you can leave it dark and dingy, and I think I'm going to take my craft knife and I'm going to remove these little bits that are still there, that are excess bits. These are cheap plastic, and it's reflected in the mould, and you just need to scrape the bits off very, very carefully. You get them around the pieces sometimes, not always. It's the way it goes. So I'm going to get on with painting my skeleton, and I'll come back in a bit. Now that the glue around the edge of my little base piece is about dry, I have got my clay out. Now this is Das modelling clay. This is an air drying clay, and it is what is known as a paper clay. It's okay. I'm not brilliant with it, I don't claim to be, but it works for my purposes. Now what I've also got is my very meagre, not very good modelling tools, just in case I need them. I've got some water just off camera, and I've put a small amount of glue on there, which will hopefully help the clay stay in place. I have had problems in the past with clay coming away from my pieces, and I've had to put glue in as stuff has dried. So I'm hoping I can do it this way. I can't find the PVA glue, I've put it somewhere. Yeah, so I'm going to start off with some clay, and my clay is a little bit on the old side, and although I've kept it sealed up, some of the edges have dried out, and I lose some every time I use it. So I'm going to start off by putting some clay over here, just a sort of rough covering, and then we're going to start figuring out how we're going to fit that in, because that has got to be fitted into the clay so it looks like it's coming out of the ground. So I think what I'm going to have to do is put the clay on, make a sort of hole for that, for my skeleton. I was pointing to it and you can't see. So it will be at an angle, some way supported by the clay, and see how we go. I have done my thing with the air dry clay, and as you can see, I've got it so that it sort of is supporting my bit of a skeleton. It will be viewed probably from an angle like that when it's done, and all of this will be covered in fake soil, which will be tea leaves. Now I've gone over a little bit in a few places, but you can sand this when it's dry, so I'm going to remove that. As you can see, there's a space, so I know where it goes, and I'm going to put both of them, well, I'm going to put this off to dry. It's going to take quite a while, and obviously I'm going to leave the skeleton to dry some more because I think I'm going to apply some more paint to it. So I'm going to pop this out of the way, and I'm going to turn my attention to my actual jar. Now, as I said, this one's got more marks on it. This is from the glue. Now, I could sit there and clean it up, and actually that is mostly coming off and it looks okay. It'll look better, but I've still got all these bits to cover up because this one just didn't come up as clean. So my inspiration picture, the skeleton, the bones, are against a very dark background, and to me it looks like there's soil at the bottom, which is obviously providing the growing medium for the flowers, and then it looks like there's draped fabric behind. It's very much an artistic interpretation. So I am going to try and use some of this net fabric to give a bit of drapery to it by gluing pieces down and over it. So it's not going to completely cover the pot, but it's going to obscure bits of it so that there will only be one bit, which I think is probably going to be on this side, where it actually is open so that you can actually see into it. That's my thought. We'll see how it turns out. It has actually been a few days since I filmed the last bit, and there's a couple of reasons for that. In the first case, I tried doing what I wanted to do on the outside of the jar and it didn't quite work. So I had to go back to the drawing board and redo it. And secondly, there have been other calls on my time. So what I've done is I've actually covered the back, most of the jar in fact, with some black netting that I've applied layers of it with Mod Podge. The Mod Podge has helped make it more opaque than just the netting would. And I've got to clean it up because obviously I've got it in places where I didn't want it, including inside, but hey ho. And then the top I've done with some circles of cereal box board that I have covered in felt and then covered in netting, and that, as you can see, isn't actually completely dry yet because I've only done that this morning, but it just makes what I wanted, which was a nice little quite intimate little space in there, rather than it looking like a snow globe. That's the word I'm looking for, snow globe. So that's about ready. It needs to dry some more. It's going to need a little bit of cleaning and everything, but I can put that to one side. Now the skeleton, the part of the skeleton I'm using, has had 2 coats of the I think it was linen paint, and I'm liking how that's looking. It's paler. It looks more like bleached bone than it did before. Obviously it depends on the look you're going for. If you want it really, really dirty, you can go for really, really dirty, but that is ready to move on. And then my base, which I will pick up carefully, has dried. The extra time it took me to do the jar has worked in my favour with this, because obviously this needed a good amount of drying time, and it's now ready to have some landscaping applied. Now the landscaping is going to take the form of tea leaves, and I will just be applying glue and applying the tea leaves on top of the black paint that I've popped on here. But yeah, that's looking good. And of course I've got the gaps where the skeleton will sit, and he will fit in like that. It also gives me a bit of an idea of where I need to leave the soil. my tea leaf soil, that is, just so that I can get this looking something like. And so I'm going to remove him very, very carefully, and we'll start with the tea leaves. Base has had its coat of tea leaves. I have shown previously how I do this technique, but basically it is just a coat of glue and tea leaves, which is then allowed to dry, and then I put over it a coat of PVA and water. Now, if you're doing it on large areas, you can make it in a little spray bottle. I just mix up a little bit in a pot and dab it on. Can't say I paint it on, because you do dab it on. It is a dabbing technique, it's the best one. And this is starting to dry. Now, I need to let this dry properly, I think, although it's not far off. And then I'm going to see about fitting it into the lid. So what I need to do is I need to put the lid on and identify which bit ends up at the front, because these lids do always end up in the same place. I'll just make sure that I get the view that I want through my little window thing. And then, well, then it's on to the stages of adding the bones, which is waiting here, and decorating it. But that shouldn't be too long, because it is drying nicely. We're getting hot again, and the glue for once is actually working on my side, and it's actually drying. I don't know if it's because of the amount of water that was in it and it's all evaporating, but whatever it is, I'll take it. To decorate my little scene, I started with a offcut of the net I was using for the outside of the jar. And all I've done is I've stretched it so that it's sort of curled up a bit. As you do with this, it does happen if you give it a bit of a stretch. And then I wrapped it around my fingers and I knotted it so it looked like a scarf that had been worn perhaps before death. And then I have stuck it to the spine of my bones, and then I've draped it round. The one bit actually curves up quite nicely at this one end, and I've used a little bit of glue to stick it to the ground. The glue will dry clear, but I haven't long done that. And I'm decorating it with roses. Now, I'd got some roses that I got a more open one of, but they were actually a white colour and they didn't quite cut it. I needed a bit more colour, and I decided to go with these little buds I've got in red. If I'd have thought, with the amount of time it's taken me to do this, I could have ordered some, but I'm trying to go with using what I've got at the moment. And I also couldn't be bothered to try and make some of my own. I have made some in the past. It is possible to make quite passable roses just using paper, but I've gone with these, which come with a paper covered wire stem, and all I have done is I have wrapped the stem around the handle of a paintbrush, and then I've fed them through various points on the skeleton, well, on the rib cage mostly. And you see, by twisting it in, hopefully I can get this to twist in without getting caught on the ones that are already there. What I can do is I can do this like this, and then I can drop the end of this down into the pelvis. And what I've done is I've sort of made it look like the rose is growing up through the pelvis. That probably has some kind of deep and meaningful connotations, meanings, etc. But I've just done it because it's convenient. And I've also got a couple of pieces of this green jewellery wire, And I've done the same with this. I've twisted it and made sort of pretty bits that I can then feed in at various points, and again back down into the pelvis. And by doing these bits that go through the net fabric of this sort of scarf, hopefully it makes it look like something that sort of happened a bit more naturally. If I was going to do this again, I would try and make sure that the pelvis was lower down on the piece, so it actually looked a bit more like it was coming out of the ground. It was done a bit differently, but I like it as it is. I do like it. And if I tip it to the side, you can actually get a better view of this. And yeah, I'm really liking this sort of semi-spooky, sort of bizarre kind of a piece, which will make a perfect little decoration, probably for my new craft space. I am going to put this into the jar properly in a while, but I haven't done yet because I've still got bits of glue drying, and the jar actually makes it harder to show you the piece. But this is my finished little diorama, just something random that I decided to make from bits that were hanging around the craft room, and I'm very pleased with it. Now, I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you have, please like, comment and subscribe. Don't forget to ring that notification bell if you want to know when I put a new video up. I upload most weeks, normally on a Friday, but I never say never. Real life gets in the way, and I don't make any promises. But until next time, bye.